The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, all the physical conferences that came after has been canceled. Even these conferences I needed to talk in 2020, and then it delayed in 2021, and now at last in 2022 we have code.talks conference. But in this situation in life, when plans get cancelled, I don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, I always think about how to create good situations from bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning, we have a lot more time to spend at home in the closure time. And in the first few days, I was just rearranging my apartment, moving everything, change everything, and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. But then came the first weekend that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time on the weekend? And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. But I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create the coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you're seeing right now is built only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using CSS preprocessor like Sass, and even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all this logic of this game, for example, when I'm clicking the UMI button, it's opening a pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game menu frame and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And as you can see here, even the score is going up. Even that is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of your code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old code pen with these cute creatures that was painted on Canvas HTML, and they remind me a little bit coronavirus creatures. And I had in my mind this old game, Chicken Invaders, and I took the Invaders word and some other design on how to design the main navigation. And when you are thinking about inspiration in life is always, but always, to take either older ideas and to create from them something else, something new. The first thing that I wanted to create in the game is to create the coronavirus creature. This was my inspiration. In the end, I created this cute creature, and I love it because this is my creature. And then I started to create the HTML of every one of those coronavirus creatures. First, I created this label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside I put it input type radio. And you may ask, why I'm putting a label element, and why there is input type radio inside? This is part of the logic that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here with this div with the class of body. We have the body, and inside the body we have the 12 hairs, and of course it's both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in the HTML code, like all those 12 hairs. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures, and I didn't want to copy-paste them one by one. And I needed to think about a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using here an HTML preprocessor that gives you the possibility to do the repetition part in the HTML part in a more easier way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using in the last 12 years, I think, for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, I can write it in Pug. Pug has variables, while loop, and a lot of other stuff. And as you can see, Pug is written really different from regular HTML. It's being compiled to HTML, but it's written really different. And when you are working in Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. You need to write everything in Pug. And this means that I need to update all the HTML project to the new way that Pug is being written. And now let's start to talk about the logic of the game, and let's start first to understand all the partial that I'm creating the game, all the frames that I'm using in my own game. And if we are looking on the game itself, the first frame that I need to represent is the game menu navigation. And this is one part of the HTML document that I need to represent. The second one is when I will click on the How to Play pop-up, How to Play button, it will open the How to Play pop-up. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame, in the same way, when I'm clicking the OMI, it will open another pop-up. And this is the third frame that I need to represent in the HTML document. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game menu frame, and it will open the game frame itself. And this is our last 4 frame that we need to represent in the HTML document. To represent all those frames, I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML elements. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first one is the frame of the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of OMI. And the last one is the pop-up of How to Play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How can I hide all the other frames in a really easy way? I'm just giving all the other frames, display none, and in this way, when I'm first loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now, I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? If you are thinking about input HTML of checkboxes, checkboxes, they are like flags. Unchecked, false. Checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes. Every one of them needs to do a different operation. The first checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, this means that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame. But if it's checked, I want to do the opposite, to show the game frame and to hide the game menu frame. The 2 other checkboxes are even more simple to understand because they're doing only one operation. The checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, if you are unchecked, don't show me the How to Play pop-up, and if you are checked, please show me the How to Play pop-up. And in the same way, the third checkbox with the ID name of OMI pop-up, if you are unchecked, don't show me the OMI pop-up, and if you are checked, please show me the OMI pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document, opacity of 0, position absolute top minus something, you cannot see them, and you cannot click on them. And now, we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can we do it? To do that, I'm using here a really old feature of HTML. The game navigation button that you saw in the main navigation are not button HTML elements. Instead, these buttons are created from label HTML elements that only look like buttons. And as you can see, this Save the World label button element is being connected with the 4 attribute that label have to the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game. You see Toggle Game here and Toggle Game here. This means that if you are clicking on this Save the World label button element, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked, and as many times that you will clicking on it. The same way for the 2 other label button elements, for example, the OMI, this one, you're clicking on it, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name OMI pop-up. This one One time you click it, it will change from unchecked to checked. You will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked. But this still doesn't do for us any visual operation. But now we need to use the status of those checkboxes to show or hide other frames of the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature, we have the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox in a status of checked. And if there is a specific checkbox in the status of checked, I can use the sibling selector of CSS to select any sibling element that come after, and I can give it now display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames of the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play label button element, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up. It will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. And if now this checkbox that has this ID name is in the status of checked, this specific selector will start to work for us. If this checkbox is in the status of checked, please go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play. This is the real pop-up, and I'm now just giving it display block. And now this pop-up is opened. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How am I closing this pop-up? And if you are thinking about it, it's really the same idea. The X button and the close button, again, are not button HTML element. Again, they are label HTML element that are connected with the for attribute, in this case of this specific pop-up, for the same checkbox. And this means that if I'm clicking on the X or the close, they both have a for attribute that is being connected to the same checkbox. And when the pop-up is open, it's in status of checked. But if I'm clicking on this label button, they are triggering the checkbox, changing its status from checked to unchecked. And if this checkbox is in the status of unchecked, this selector will stop to work, and we will get the display none that we declared in the beginning. And now the pop-up is being closed. But now you need to ask yourself the third question. What is happening when I'm clicking the Save the World button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking the Save the World button, the play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do with one checkbox two different operations? And again, it's really the same idea when you are thinking about it. When the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game is being checked, first I'm going to one sibling element with a class of game menu frame and giving it display none. This is closing me the game menu frame. And then I'm going to another sibling element with a class of game frame, and I'm giving it display block, and this is opening the game. And in this way, if you are thinking about it, I can do as many operations that I want with one status of one checkbox. This way of written is, of course, written in Sass. You can write it in two separated CSS selector, but it's a lot more readable to read it and write it with Sass. And now, let's continue to our next trick, because this is one of the most amazing tricks in this game. When I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures, they are being disappear, and the CSS score is going up. We actually have here two separated tricks in CSS that we need to talk about them. The first trick is when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures, they need to be disappear. The second one, that I need to count all those dead viruses and print the total score to the screen. Let's start with the first trick. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label element. And inside, I also told you that we have input type radio. But I also told you that this is part of the logic of the game. And beside of it, I told you that this div with the class of body, it's all the visual part of the virus. Inside the body of the virus, we have the eyes and the ears. They are here inside. And what I'm doing in the real game, I'm doing an animation for the label HTML element. I'm telling it to move with the CSS animation from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. But because the label element is wrapping all the visual part in it, it's meaning that all the visual parts are moving with it. And if you are clicking on the visual part of the virus, it's like you are clicking on the label HTML element. And because there is input type radio inside, it will automatically get triggered, and it will change the status from status of unchecked to status of checked. In this case, you don't even need the for attribute in the ID name, because input that is inside the label, when you're clicking the label, it's triggering the input type radio. Then I'm doing a CSS animation for the label HTML element. You are clicking on the visual part. It's like you are clicking on the label. It's triggering the input type radio inside, and it's changing its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. This status of checked is telling us that the virus is being dead. And now I just need to hide the visual part of the virus. To do so, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is being checked. Please, if this is checked, please go to the sibling element with the class of body and just give it opacity of 0. You see, now you are clicking on those coronavirus creature and they are being disappear from the screen. And now let's talk about the logic of the pure CSS score. To do that, I'm using a really old feature of CSS, which is called CSS counter. And in order to it to work precisely, it needs to be defined on the HTML before all the input type radio that we have in our own game. To do so, the easiest place for me to create a CSS counter, it's on the body HTML element. How you are creating a CSS counter? I'm just selecting here the body HTML element, and I'm using the special property of counter reset. This is creating me a new CSS counter, and I gave it the name Corona. Now I need to count all those dead viruses. I'm just selecting every input type radio that is being checked, counter increment the Corona value that I created here, okay? The CSS counter that I've created here. And now we need to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work precisely, it needs to be defined in the HTML part after now all the input type radio. To do so, I just created here div class sum, and then the text score is coming from the HTML. And here, immediately after, I want to print the total score to the screen. To do so, I'm just selecting the class of sum, using the after pseudo element that will come here immediately after, using here the property of content, and the property of content can get the native CSS counter function that inside I'm just printing the Corona value that we incremented here and created here, and in this way it's always listening and printing all those dead viruses that have radio button that is being checked. Because it's a really complicated example, let's see example in CodePen for that. Let's open this CodePen. Yes. As you can see here, I kind of created 5 coronavirus creatures. These are the label. This is the input type radio. Here, because it's an easier example, I show you it, but in the real game, it has opacity of 0. All the visual part of the virus is this div with the class of body. This is the big black circle. And in the real game, the eyes and the ears are here inside. Okay? A place to summarize the score, in the bottom div class sum, the text score is coming from the HTML part, and the numbers that you're seeing here are coming from the CSS. To declare a CSS counter, I'm just selecting the body HTML element with the special property of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. To count all those dead viruses, every input type radio that is being checked, counter increment me the CSS counter of Corona. Beside of it, if the input type radio is being checked, please go to the sibling element with the class of body and give its opacity to 0. You see, if this will be checked, it will go to the sibling element, this one with the class of body, and it will hide it. And to print the total score to the screen, I'm just selecting the class of sum, using here the after pseudo element and the content property that will put me here, the content of the Corona value, and this will print me here the total score to the screen. Let's see that it really works. Let's click on some Corona creature. You can even see the radio button is being checked. And in this way, you can create a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. But now let's continue to another amazing trick. How can I create a pure CSS countdown? Let's see the CodePen example for this thing. As you can see here in the HTML, we don't have any numbers. We actually have here a CSS animation on the content property. But as you can see here, we have an animation between 9 to 0, not 99 to 0. What is actually happening here? It's actually not an integer. It's a two separated string that are only really synchronized and only look like integer that every 1 second is going number down. I'm actually doing here 2 different CSS animation on the before and the after pseudo element of this span HTML element with a class of count. That you will understand what you're seeing right now. Let's print here the text AA, and you will see that those values are being separated. They don't have any real connection between of them. And how? Now let's see how it really works. Let's reset the animation, and the first value is the before pseudo element. I'm calling the animation of countdown that is going between 9 to 0, and I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and 1 iteration. And if it's total of 10 frames between 9 to 0, this is also mean that every 10 seconds it will go number down, 10 seconds another, and so on and so on. And I'm telling it to work only for 1 iteration. After the 1 iteration of 100 seconds, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation of 0. To do so, I'm just putting here the forwards value that telling the animation, when you are finished all your iteration, that is only 1 in this case, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. This one, 0. For the second value, I'm using the after pseudo element. I'm calling now the same CSS animation, but in a different way. I'm telling it to work now for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 seconds and a total of 10 frames, this means that every 1 second it will go number down, 2 seconds another, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for a total of another 9 iterations. Why? Because I declared that I want it to work for a total of 10 iterations. And after all those 10 iterations, I want it to stack again on the 0 value. And again, I'm just putting here the same forwards value that telling the animation, when you are finishing all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation of 0. And let's see that it really works. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, finish. Nice. But we have a lot of more tricks that we need to talk about them. Random values. Random values. First, I want to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own game. And let's play this game again. If you can see the location of the viruses, they are coming from random places. They are moving in random location. Even the scale of them is being randomized. Even the rotation of them is being randomized. But wait a minute. How can you create random stuff only with CSS? You can't, but you can do it with Sass. Because it's a really important example, I want to show you this in the real code of the game. And you need to think about it. If every virus has different location and it's done with CSS animation, this is also mean that I needed to create 100 different CSS animation. And of course, I don't want to write them one by one. Then how I've done it, I'm using here another feature of Sass. I'm using here 2 features of Sass, you can say. The first feature that I'm using here, let's zoom out. As you can see here, I have Sass for loop. This for loop of Sass is running 100 iteration, and this is creating me dynamically this animation 100 times. And every coronavirus has 6 different locations in the axis, the x-axis. They are always the same. You can see here the translate x is always the same. But in the translate to y-axis, inside, I'm using here the Sass random function that is randomizing here a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just now doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I'm using here the Sass random function, and even for the rotation of it, I'm using here the Sass random function. Because I don't want you to be afraid from this, or how I got here, oh, interesting. Because I don't want you to be afraid from this Sass random function, let me show you another example that it's a lot more easier to understand, and don't be afraid from PUG. It's just regular HTML. It's always just regular HTML and CSS, yes? This is the HTML, 6 empty li HTML element. The numbers that you're seeing again inside are not coming from the HTML, they are coming from the CSS. In the Sass code, I have here a Sass for loop that is running 6 iterations. This is a Sass variable that declaring that it's running 6 iterations. And in every one of the iterations, it's creating me dynamically the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. In every one of the iterations, in the before pseudo element, inside the content property, inside the string, I'm using here the Sass random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. And for you to believe me that those values are randomized, the only thing that I need to do that they will change is to compile the SAS code again to CSS. To do so, I will just press here Enter, and it will compile, and the number values will change. If I will do it again, they will change again, and as many times that I will click on it, it will change. And that will believe me that is just CSS. What is being compiled is just regular CSS. Nothing special. Okay. The next thing is when the game is over, I'm putting after 99 seconds the game over curtain, and I wanted to create the effect that we can play this game again and again and again. But I had a problem. I understand that the checkbox that was checked to play the game need to be unchecked. To reset the CSS score of the game, I need to reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked. And I thought about a lot of ways how to solve this problem. But in the end, I remember the best solution that I can do so. In this case, the back to main menu button is not a label element. This is the only case that I'm using here, a special input, which is a type of reset. You can use input type reset or button type reset. And in order to reset all the radio button and all the checkboxes, the only thing that left for me now to do is just to wrap all the project with a form HTML element. And now you are clicking this input type reset button, and it will automatically reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. This will bring you automatically to the game menu navigation. All the radio button that was checked will be unchecked. The CSS score of the game will be now 0. And now you can play this game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask yourself, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? I need to put it exactly after 99 seconds. And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in this game. And let's open it. Everyone knows that animation has animation duration value. Animation duration is telling the animation how much time it needs to take from the start until the end. But what we are also forget that we have second animation duration, the animation delay duration, that's telling the animation after how much time it needs to be start. And in this case, in the real game, it has animation delay of 99 seconds. For this example, I put in here only 5 seconds, that we don't need to wait 99 seconds. And let's see that it really works. To do it, let's refresh the screen, and let's do it together, count between 1 to 5, but only when you see the text of wait 5 seconds, okay? I'm refreshing. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over. Okay, in this talk we saw a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create a pure CSS game, and maybe you are thinking that this is the main key takeaway, but it isn't. What I want you to take from this talk is to create your own fun project. It can be in CSS, HTML, JavaScript, I don't care, Angular, Vue, I don't care, React, whatever you want. But why it's so important to create project for fun? Because we as adults, we're starting to forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. When we are small children, what we do, we are playing with our friends, and we are learning new stuff. In the animal kingdom, it's the same. Small kittens, they are like hunting each other and having fun. And in the end, when they are adult, they know how to hunt. But what we are doing as adult person, starting to learn things in the boring way, in the hard way. And why? Why to be so frustrated to learn things and suffer? Instead, create your own project for fun. It will be a little bit frustrated, but you're having fun, you are achieving something, and you will enjoy it. And if you are building your own project, you're starting to be a lot better web developers. And if you are a lot better web developers, in the end, you will get a lot better salary. But even that is not important. Because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Create your own project because you can. Before we finish, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright. Upright is the open source Firebase alternative with a new version. Yesterday we come with a really full version. And beside of it, I'm doing a lot of CSS stuff only for fun, not for my company, not for other things, for playing. The best way to follow me is via my Twitter account. All the other stuff you can see in my own website. if you want to play with the game. This is my CodePen account. You can see it, the first one there. And if you want the slide, take up your smartphone and QR this QR code. And thank you very much for listening.